Welcome along, everyone. It's Sunday night. I've just got out of my pajamas for the first time in 2 months and did my hair. And I thought it was important to do so because we've got a very, very important guest on our show. He really doesn't need much in the way of introduction. One of the finest ambassadors our hobby has got by a long way, in my opinion. Welcome along, Alex Hagberg. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Stu. Thank you for having me on your live stream on the On-Road podcast. I've been on the podcast before, a couple times through different videos, and I believe for the audio podcast as well. And it's always been great. So hopefully we can make this another great opportunity.
So what we've got on the screen, Alex, you probably won't be able to see it, but on the screen we've got various different displays at the moment. There's you and me up on the screen, and we've got the live questions, hopefully, that are gonna come through as we get chatting. We want to actively ask people to ask any questions that they might have for Alex. He's got his pit board, his car set up, his 12-scale setup. He is fully prepared, as you will see, to answer any technical questions, which I think that is a really amazing opportunity for anyone that wants to find out from the very best in the business. So listen, it's been a pretty terrible year for us all, one way or another, in 2020. We can talk about negatives all day long, but what positives have you taken from 2020, Alex?
So it's been a really weird year to be a professional RC racer, as you can imagine. There's been very few races. I mean, for the last 12 months, I've only raced 4 or 5 times in total. And especially during the second lockdown, which came at the end of the year, it's been very difficult to be productive on the tracks because the track's been closed. It's been difficult to do my regular job, if that makes sense. But something positive that actually came out of 2020, in my opinion.
Okay, we seem to have lost Alex for a moment. Let's see if we can...
I think I lost you there.
Oh, yeah, there you're back. Super.
So where did you lose me at? When did I disappear?
So you said there was a few positives that came out of 2020.
Yeah, so the few positives that I see it is that after talking to people in the industry and people working with RC in general, 2020 for RC sales-wise was a good year because people have been buying a lot of RC stuff. The problem is they haven't been buying racing stuff. They have been buying RC stuff, like stuff that you play with driving up and down the street or go to a park somewhere, and those kind of cars, those kind of hobby products. So sales for racing hasn't been great. It hasn't been bad, but it hasn't been great. But sales for RC has been really good. So we need to use this momentum and try to make these people interested in racing and not only in bashing, if that makes sense to you.
Makes total sense.
Because people have been sitting at home, they haven't had much to do, and the curiosity for RC stuff has definitely been there.
Have you in the speaking with the chaps and chapesses at X-Ray, what's been their takeaway from 2020?
So when the first lockdown came, I think X-Ray, just like all the other manufacturers, they got really scared, and they didn't know what to expect for the upcoming months, so to speak. Sales-wise, will we be racing and so on? Because X-Ray is solely a racing company. I mean, they don't do any hobby level products. It's all racing. So they really live off racing. And when there's no racing, things are gonna get tough. And at first they were a bit scared. but I also saw opportunities in the racing season being with so few races that there was a lot of time to actually develop product in between. Also, that depended a bit on how the tracks were open and how the tracks were available. But there was a lot of time for development, much more so than it has been in the last few years, when we were constantly racing and we didn't really have time to truly develop the products.
And when you look at the development that you have made with the 21 car, you were very fortunate in the fact that you could obviously do that without lockdown, in a sense, couldn't you? I mean, 2020 is when you brought the car out. You were able to get over and test in the arena. Is it a little frustrating that you haven't been able to go out and actually put it on the track and compare and see how it's going to go up against the competition?
Yeah, I said it before. I mean, it's particularly frustrating right now because I think we have the best 12 skill that we've ever had right now. And we have a really good touring car as well. And it's been frustrating to sit at home and not being able to use the cars, which I think will be really competitive. And not for the customers to be able to enjoy them as well. So it's been really frustrating to not even be able to go and test the cars. I mean, to race is one thing, but to not even be able to go and test and try to develop the products, especially because of the second lockdown, everything really closed. I mean, the local track I have here closed as well, so it's been tough. But hopefully, we'll get to put the cars on the track soon.
There's been a few chaps saying that the sound has been a little echoey. Hopefully that's all sorted now. Yeah, a few of the guys have come through now. It just syncing up with the Skype and stuff, and I think all the glitches are now out of the system, and we're good to go. So you know, the positives that you've taken. Obviously, RC has had an influx of the bashing, and you know, people have been spending more money. I know. My wife's she's not listening. She's got her headphones on and watching TikTok. But I mean, I've spent a lot of time making purchases, you know, getting involved in slightly other different forms of the hobby. Have you ventured off into a different direction with any of your RC hobbies? Have you made any purchases outside of maybe necessarily car racing, but any other forms of RC that you have an attraction or interest in?
I mean, I haven't personally done any purchases related to RC other than the normal stuff, but I've seen the popularity of the small 1/76 scale turbo cars. I don't know if you've seen them. The ones that are so small that you can build tracks in your living room and you can race against your family members or whatever. I mean, those things have sold a whole lot. I mean, I see those cars everywhere. So they've been extremely popular because you can race them at home. I mean, they're not terribly bad when it comes to quality. I mean, they're actually pretty decent for the price that they are. And I think that's one thing that's helped to maintain the interest for racing when you cannot race your regular cars.
And you know, obviously, with this time that you've had to sort of kick back and spend some good time with your family, you must have reflected on last year, obviously with the Worlds, the year before. Does it give you a time to think about your strengths and weaknesses in the hobby? I'm always, you know, being a coach myself, I'm always kind of evaluating people's strengths and weaknesses. Is that something that you get too much involved with?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, these days, all races are, first of all, they're recorded on video, so you can rewatch your racing that you have done in the previous years, and you can try to learn something from watching that racing. I try to think back of technically about setups and stuff that I've run and how could I have done things better. I go through my notes, I go through my setup sheets. If you're a racer, if you're competitive like you and me, you're constantly thinking about how to improve. And I mean, RC is always on my mind. So when I go to bed at night, I think about caster changes on my 12 scale, right? Like how could I have gone faster on that track at that specific occasion and things like that. So yeah, it's been a good opportunity to reflect and to try to improve the racing program for the future, for sure. And as I said, to watch videos is a really good way to learn. And as we've seen earlier in the year or the previous year, VRC can be a good way to pass the time as well, and to actually hold the radio and to control something with the radio, even though it's virtual, it's not the real deal, but it's better than nothing, I would say.
Has there been a common thread in the negative side of your review in terms of what you want to improve upon? That's sort of giving away your weakness maybe to the opposition, but I don't honestly know that actually probably makes too much of a difference. But is there something that you strive, any one particular thread when you've reviewed back your performances that seems to be a constant that you would like to improve upon?
Yeah, so I know my weaknesses, they're mostly related to the driving style, the way I drive. Because I know that I'm quite psychologically strong. I'm quite technically knowledgeable. I know a lot about the car and the setup and everything. So mostly what I can improve on is my driving. And I know that my weakness is normally fast outdoor tracks with long corners, because that's when you really need to not drive too tight of a line, and you need to maintain the speed. And so whenever there's a track layout which is too open and with too many sweeping corners, I tend to struggle more for pace than on a small technical track with tight corners. So I know for the future that that's something I really need to work on, and to work on my lines for those sort of tracks. So that's the kind of tracks I've been trying to drive on VRC as well, to try and to improve my lines for that kind of tracks, because I know that I really enjoy and I do well on small technical tracks, but I need to get better on fast open outdoor tracks. So yeah, that's one thing I've been focusing on.
It's funny because I've been watching a bit of the Snowbirds coverage. Lewis Barker, he's tuned in and he's asked you how much have you missed Snowbirds this year, because the Snowbirds track, if my memory serves me correctly, that looks like the same track as it was last year, and it's quite open and flowing, and it's so difficult. The venues that you go to around the world, you get that cross of 12 scale and touring car. There's, correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably few events that actually are 12 scale specific other than Euros and Worlds maybe. To drive tracks that are like the Worlds were at Milton Keynes, it must be hard to really constantly keep on improving that part of your self-diagnosed weakness.
I mean, I definitely miss the Snowbirds. It's been one of my favorite races for as long as I've been attending it. I think I only missed it twice in the last 8 or 9 years. So it was hard not being able to go this year, but unfortunately that's the reality. So, but I've been trying to watch online to see how the guys are doing and how our team drivers are doing. But yeah, at the Snowbirds, actually, historically, I've done really well, because it is a track which I consider to be a good track for my driving style. Pretty small, technical, a lot of back and forth, if that makes sense. Yes, a track that normally is good for me, and I'm comfortable there. So yeah, I also miss going there for that reason, that I usually do well there. But yeah, I mean, as you said, you mentioned about 12 scale not being present on the international scene as much. But yeah, at Snowbirds, for example, and at other US events, 12 scale is very important, because 12 scale stock especially is really big in the US. At the race in Cleveland, the US indoor champs, usually they have one 12 scale stock 17.5 as the biggest class. So 12 scale culturally and historically in the US is very, very big. 12 scale modified is obviously not as popular among hobbyists, especially because it's too fast. But it's also difficult when you're racing touring car at a big race to adjust your driving style between the two classes, because when you go from 12 scale to the touring car feels really big. It feels like a bus, like it's reacting very slowly. Then the other way around, when you go to 12 scale, the car feels really fast and reactive and has loads of traction. So it's always hard to alternate between the two, but it is a challenge that I enjoy normally.
What have you done? Have you done much? In this downtime, what have you been doing? What have you spent most of your time doing? Anything to do with RC? I know I follow you on Instagram, and you've moved back to Portugal recently for a second time, I believe. You came back and then you went back again. Obviously, lockdown was probably maybe a bit of a self-imposed move back to Portugal, but you've got a track very close to you at home, or I assume it is, that obviously you can use, and mainly touring car. Is that how you've spent most of the lockdown while the UK have been shut down?
Yeah, so we moved back in August, and at that time, everything was open. Everything was not too bad COVID-wise. So I've been running outdoors on a weekly basis, because you can race outdoors here through the winter because the climate is pretty mild. So until the second lockdown actually came into effect, I've been running touring cars outdoor weekly to try and develop and to just keep running and to try and get better at touring car. There's no indoor tracks in Portugal at all. There's only outdoor tracks. So I'm limited to that class. But it's been a good opportunity to be able to run outdoors through the winter, especially when other countries were locked down, and we were still able to test and to do some work. But other than that, I mean, I feel that I'm more busy than people think. There's always work to do, not only for my social media channels, which I try to keep on top of, but I try to be available for customer support, which is a work that I do on a daily basis. And I try to stay in contact with the factory. We're always discussing development of the products. And of course, when I go to the tractors, there's mechanical preparations to do. So I think I'm more busy than people think. Even though it's been a few months since I've raced, I've constantly had things to do. So it's definitely a full-time job, even though we're not racing right now.
I think that's the case in when you work with sports people, professionals, people that are doing these elite performances for their job. There's so much, the time actually at the event is actually quite a small proportion of actually what goes on in their day-to-day lives, isn't it? And I think that's, you mentioned your social media, and I think that's one of the things for me about you that really stands out, obviously on top of your driving as well, Alex, that you're always so present in the public eye. And I think when you look at that, and we talked before we came on air, the shift that needs to go to more social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, all of these different mediums that give a professional radio control car racer like yourself a way of getting what you do out there, and giving people a sort of another dimension to their hobby. Because we are in unusual times, and there has to be other outlets that you can do. I really enjoyed doing all of this stuff. It's all part of the hobby, but we're all itching to get back at the track. But I think that's something that you do so well, and I think I believe that it's in the hands of people like yourself, and certainly not me from a driving aspect, but someone that's passionate about the hobby, to keep trying to keep putting it out there on as many forums and mediums as we possibly can, because it can only be good to keep driving sales and new products and getting new manufacturers into new different classes, etc., etc.?
Yeah, I mean,
as
as we spoke about briefly before we started, I don't want to call myself an influencer because that's the wrong word, but in one sense, I'm an RC influencer because the people that follow me, they see that I do certain things with my racing program, or I use certain products that hopefully that can spark an interest among these people to keep racing RC and maybe bring it to the next level and invest more time in RC. So I find it absolutely crucial for a driver of my position to be available to everybody. I mean, if anyone needs any advice or any technical help, I always try to respond and to be as helpful as I can. I mean, not only X-ray users or X-ray drivers, but RC racers in general. And I've definitely taken that to the next step during the pandemic because I've had less racing, so I've actually had more time to actually be available online and to help people that race RC.
Yeah, your clips are always a topic of conversation. Yeah, when I've got a few chat forums that I'm with friends and family that race. You know that learn so much from your videos, and it's good to I didn't realize this, didn't realize that, and I've seen it firsthand at many a track event that you help people. Not just X-ray, but across the full spectrum of cars. And I think that's and I think that's something that feels like has happened during this time, that the 12th scale community has got a little bit closer. It feels like there's been some bridges made, through different people. I don't know. It just feels like there's a bit more closeness. That we're all pulling for the same cause for once. You go to a track, you might have 3, 4, 5 different manufacturers. They're all kind of pulling away from each other because they want to win. But now all of a sudden, these 3, 4, 5 manufacturers actually are all pulling in the same direction because they want to get back to the track. So there feels like there's been a bit more of a closeness that's come about from these difficult times. Listen, we should start taking some of these questions because there's some really good ones coming in.
Okay, cool.
Let's. Just Will, he's called in from the USA. He's a truck driver. I don't know whether he drives Tamiya trucks or he drives real trucks, but good to have him along. Lewis, we asked a question about how much you've missed Snowbirds this year. You've answered that one. Matt Jones, really good question here, and it's one that we've maybe done before, but it's really worth covering again. He's someone that, and I had actually someone purchase. I was selling a car, an LMP car, and another chap that's come from GT12 to LMP. And Matt Jones is the same. He's saying GT12 for a good few years now, and he's now moving to LMP 12 scale. What's the best advice that you could give Matt on making that transition, Alex?
You mean the transition from GT12 to LMP?
Absolutely.
I would say start with a slow motor class in the LMP, so 13.5 or even 17.5 if you have that class available locally, and use the knowledge that you gathered from GT12 as for the basics when it comes to setup and things like that, and try to apply it to LMP. And of course you'll be a bit frustrated going to LMP that the car's a bit more sensitive, it responds better to setup changes, but also it's going to be more rewarding because the car handles better, it has more downforce, it has more steering. So don't only let it frustrate you, but also let it reward you when the car is handling so much better than your GT12, and try to apply whatever you learned from GT12 onto the LMP, but be ready for the differences when it comes to paying attention to small details. I mean, you're a GT12 racer yourselves too, so you know basically what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think that the GT12 is a fantastic class to begin with, and I remember many moons ago back at West Kent watching Dave Spashett, Ollie Payne, going around West Kent on a Sunday morning with those 12 scale cars, and I just turned away because it just looked like acid. It was just chaos. It's so quick and so fast. And then the noise that they made when they were hitting things. Not that Ollie and Dave would do that much hitting, but the other people in their heat would do. But then when you go across to the other side, your attention to detail is huge, isn't it? I mean, the car, it takes car maintenance to a whole new level, and I think that's what you need to get as a GT12 are going to LMP. You need to get passionate about detail. And you're talking about 0.1 of a millimeter shim, that kind of detail. Now, that's not necessarily for everyone, but I think there are ways around choosing your setups, where you run, what you run, to get around that. But I think you're absolutely, obviously you're absolutely on point with the detail aspect that you need to spend on these 12 scale cars. But in a way, that gives you more when you're at home, doesn't it? A GT12 is kind of throw it into the cupboard and you can pull it out whenever and not really do too much with it. With an LMP car, you can take it home, fettle it, love it like your child, your dog, have a little bit of a play around with it, learn little nuances, and take that to the track. You don't really have that opportunity with GT12. So let's move on to Stefanos. And Stefanos, he actually put this question up on the X-Ray X12 page.
I got to admit that I read the
question. I read the question when I was getting ready for this call, and I was going to answer him, but I didn't have time. So I figured that we could do it live. We can put my car on the scales.
I'm all about live, Alex. I'm all about live.
I got the 4-corner scale, so we can see how that works out. Maybe you can read the question fully, just to repeat the question.
So while Alex is preparing, I feel like I'm your now personal assistant. I love this, Alex. So while Alex is preparing, the question that Stefanos put to Alex was weight balancing. First of all, what is the recommended front to rear weight bias for a mid-high grip, relatively short, non-technical circuit? I mean, that's not a small question there, Alex. You've got a few levels to answer to on that one. And then 2, he follows it up. How many weights would be needed to achieve the desired weight? So off we go to Alex. He's getting his kit all prepared. I mean, listen, you don't get this kind of influence and this kind of information, Alex, just anywhere, do you? You get it at the Alex Hagberg YouTube channel and the On Road Podcast YouTube channel.
Okay, so weight balance
on a 12 scale. It's not something that I've paid as much attention to as I have on my touring car. I just gotta admit that right away. But obviously, because it's a rear-wheel drive car, it's gonna be quite a bit heavier on the rear than the front compared to a 4-wheel drive car like a touring car. So normally, I know this from checking this in the past, that the weight balance is normally around 46 in the front and 54 at the back. And that's typically a good weight balance to start with for most conditions. I mean, because you're a little bit limited with first of all, we don't have that much weight on the 12 scale because the car is actually quite close to the weight limit already. So you're quite limited with the weights that you can move around. For example, here I only have 10 grams of weight on this car, and it's in the middle here you can actually not see it, but it's in between the speedo and the receiver. So if I was only to move that weight, just 10 grams, I could move it from the center to the front, and it would give me a very small percentage of a change in the weight balance. But on the track, that would obviously make a big difference. So the things that you can actually move around on this car are the electronics. You can move the battery, for example, which makes a really big difference for the handling, because the battery is a big, heavy piece. It's around 150 grams normally. So moving the battery forwards or backwards is gonna have a big impact on the handling. But anyway, let's put the car on the scales. Let's see.
This is great insight, Alex.
Okay, so this car right here, I didn't check the tweak on it, so it might be a little off from left to right. But let's see here. It's quite difficult to see here, but it's gonna be 45 front and 55 rear weight balance. So that's obviously a lot heavier on the rear. But I know that from experience and from racing touring cars that changing this by just 1% is going to have a huge impact on the handling. So in this case, moving more weight to the front, either moving the little weight that I had in the middle or moving the battery forward, it's going to make the car understeer more. It's going to make it in general a bit less responsive, and it's going to be easier to drive. So depending on the balance of your car, you need to adjust the weight balance for more front or more rear weight bias. And the only thing which I really try to move around typically is the battery. You have the opportunity to move the other electronics as well. For example, the speedo, you can move the servo, obviously. If you compensate for the servo movement by changing the Ackerman shims, you can move the servo backwards and forwards. And of course, if you make wheelbase changes, that's gonna change your weight bias as well. So if I answered his question by saying that 46.54 or 45.55 is a good starting point, yeah, I mean that's the weight balance that's on the scale, but this can easily be changed with the things I mentioned. So in general, for the modern cars in the market, I think even the Automatics car, they run around 46.54 weight balance, because that's an inline car, so it's actually going to be a bit more front heavy than our car. So my car here was 45.55, and part of that reason is that it's got the battery at the rear. It's a cross battery configuration instead of an inline configuration. So the Automatics car, for example, has the servo all the way in front of the battery, and the battery is inline. So that's why, partly that's why the car is a bit more front heavy.
So ultimately, you spend more time moving the battery around than you would really changing with weights, etc.
Yeah, I mean, just moving the battery 1 or 2 millimeters is a huge change, because the battery is such a big percentage of the total weight of the car. If you have small weights on the car which you can move around, sure, that's going to make a difference, but not as big as moving the battery. So that's the main thing regarding weight balance that I actually use for tuning.
That makes a lot of sense. He followed up by obviously how many weights would need to achieve this. Well, we've kind of answered that as well with the battery. Sex, drugs, and hardcore asked you very quickly. We don't want to go too much into this, but have you tried any sim racing yet?
I have not tried.
I have not tried any sim racing. If you refer to iRacing or anything like that, the only virtual racing I've done is with VRC, which is an RC simulator, not a real racing simulator. So no, my answer is no.
Okie dokie. James Eves, excuse me, not James Eves. Will Lewis Barker wants to know the new red dot tire from Hot Race. How is that going to work on CRC black carpet?
Yeah, so the red dot compound is a more closed cell foam. It was specifically developed for racing on ETS carpet, which is very common in Europe, as you know. I have to say, I only tried this compound once on black carpet, and it was last year, and it was a prototype compound at the time. I tried it at the US Indoor Champs in Cleveland. And at the time, I thought it had too much grip for that kind of surface. That was my impression from back, but I need to reevaluate the performance of this foam on black carpet because I didn't really get a chance to truly test it. But it is a foam which is made to have more grip, especially for racing on ETS carpet, and especially for the modified class. The tire wear is a little higher than the traditional Hagberg compound, but the performance is also better. It has definitely more grip for not only for ETS carpet, but for other types of carpet as well.
Certainly a tire to try going forwards when we get it back out to the US and run on some black carpet. Stuart Barber makes a good point. He's a good friend of mine. The Snowbirds. There's been a really strong presence of GT12, which is obviously the body shell is GT12, but they're actually running, I think, 12 scale cars. But I think the premise is to move towards the GT12 style chassis, a bit easier. Do you think that X-Ray could ever occupy that space? But would be interested in getting more involved in that as they're seeing a bigger increase in driving over in the US?
So at the moment, yeah, GT12 is growing in the US, is becoming quite popular, especially for club racing, but even for big races like Snowbirds. But as you said, it is very different to GT12 as you know it in the UK, because they use normal LMP cars, they use normal 12 scale cars, with the exception of longer body posts and an extended front bumper. I mean, those are the really big changes. The really only changes that they do to the car to race that GT12 class. So to race in that class, you can use an extra car. All you have to do is to get those parts yourself, or you can get some aftermarket parts to make that work. And there's plenty of guys running the X1221 or previous versions of the X12 in the GT12 class in the US. But as for the GT12 class that you run in the UK, so a few years ago, X-Ray was looking into the option of making a GT12 car. I have to admit that, and I think it's not a secret, but they looked into the option. For whichever reason, they didn't do it at the time. Maybe the class was already on the decline a little bit. I'm not sure, but for whichever reason, it was not made, and I don't know exactly why. But if there's enough interest for it, mainly if there's enough capacity in the production, they might consider doing it in the future. Yes.
Well, that'll probably excite many people in the UK if that is the case, Alex. So we'll watch this space if things change. We'll see. James.
Yeah, because I can just
add one thing.
Please do.
Because if you consider X-Ray to be a hardcore racing company, which they only focus on high-end racing, yes, that's true. But they've also ventured into classes which are not funster classes, but more of a fun class of racing. For example, lately they made the short course truck, the SCX, which has been considerably successful. I mean, it's been pretty popular, and I would probably compare GT12 to that kind of project. I mean, it's not the high-end racing that's X-Ray has been known for, but it is a project that's possible to do. It's not. I wouldn't rule it out.
Well, let's hope, because I think that the leverage the X-Ray have got is that because you're such a big company in RC, in many respects, you can actually sort of set the benchmark and set the interest of these classes, can't you? Because with what you've done with the short course truck, it's almost like, oh, crikey, X-Ray's got involved. Oh well, I'll buy that and go and have a go with it. And so it's almost like you are the sort of the trailblazers of the RC industry, and it's almost like you could be the catalyst to take GT12 to another level. And we mustn't forget where it came from. Dave started it, Zen got on top of it, Schumacher have been involved with it. It's certainly a class that has sort of had a bit of a boom and bust, and now it's having a bit of a revitalized, in maybe a slightly different form in the US. But as soon as you mentioned GT12, I was always surprised that someone, knowing the American audience, the way they without being disrespectful, I think simplicity is something that the Americans prefer, maybe probably less so of a 12 scale touring car, and they would prefer more of a GT12, put it down, because there's such a following with oval racing in the US, isn't there? Drag racing, some real hardcore, quite simple forms of racing, but very, very competitive. And I think GT12 is that class that is very simple to administer, have to fettle and fart ass around with, but yet you don't have all that side of it. But then when you get it on a circuit and a track, how close the racing can be. And I think that's I think I'm surprised that someone hasn't just sort of thrown a grenade in and chucked a couple of GT12 kits in the US and to a couple of popular clubs and just let it kind of explode of its own accord, really.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, let's not forget the fact that scale realism, I think, is an important factor here. Because a GT12 car looks more like a real car than an LMP car. You have to admit, right? And you know what I think is the number one reason why RC drag racing has taken off the way it has is because the cars actually look like real cars. They don't look like some high downforce vehicles only made for performance. They look like real cars. And I think most people can agree on that. RC drag racing has had a huge following in the US over the last year. And the manufacturers like Proline, for example, they admitted actually that the body shells they made for the class, they were not made to be aerodynamically efficient. They were made to look good. So for this level of racing, or for that kind of racing class, I think that's to strive for. I'm not talking about modified racing. Modified racing is completely different. Modified racing should only be about performance, including LMP. But as for the classes that are more for the hobbyists, that are more for fun, I think scale realism is a big part of it, and that's why people get interested in this kind of class.
Couldn't agree more. So James Eves asks a really good question, and not maybe everyone has seen the mass damper, but he asks, what are your thoughts on the new mass damper from Schumacher?
So my thoughts are, I mean, I can only assume because I never tried a mass damper personally on any of my cars. But speaking from what I've read and what I've studied about this is that if you set it up to work perfectly within the, how can I say this? You need to have the exact spring rate and the exact weight set up for the vehicle that you're going to run it on. And if that all matches up, if that's all correct, then I think it can have a really big benefit to the handling. It can be a component of the car which can make it easier to drive. It can absorb bumps better, etc. I mean, I think it's going to be a bigger benefit for the F1 class, for the Formula class, in which I think they included it in the car already, the new Formula 1 car from Schumacher. Because in that class, you have big rubber tires, you race on maybe tracks that are a bit rougher. But if you race on a super flat carpet circuit with LMP, I'm not sure how big of a benefit it can be. I mean, time will tell. I will have to try it myself to see what the advantage can be. But as always, we're racers, we're into technology, we love this kind of stuff. So I think it's been a great success for Schumacher, and congratulations to them for making this part and this component of the car. Because even if nobody's or very few people have actually tried it on the track, everyone's already talking about it and they're excited about it, and that's already a big success for them in that aspect.
Absolutely. The more innovation comes along, keeps us all hungry and a good appetite for these new things. Stefan asks, why do manufacturers deliver a 46mm tyre out the box, and yet we true them down to really quite small sizes?
Okay, so I think there's a couple explanations for that. The first explanation is not everyone cuts down their tires to 41mm for racing. 90% of the people do, but the 10% that don't, people that go club racing on very low grip or even on asphalt, which is popular in some countries still, they actually race on 44 or 45mm tire size. And for them, yeah, of course, they're gonna want to use the full size tire. And I think the second reason is it might be related to the manufacturing. If I have to guess, I mean, that's just my assumption.
We may have just lost you for a second there, Alex, but I think we did get the answer to that question. We have a question from Mark Frick. He says, what was the reason why the X12 changed so dramatically this year? Good question.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm gonna try to make it a short answer because the answer is quite long. But number one reason was performance. We wanted to have a car that was performing better. We didn't do as well as at the World Championships as we wanted to, partly because I think the car was not good enough, and something we had to admit. And we knew that we needed to respond to the other manufacturers' progress, and we needed to make a faster and better car. That was the first reason. The second reason was the X12 had been looking very similar for many years. We didn't have that many changes done over the last few years, so it was really time to take the next step and to make a new platform. And the third reason being, during the pandemic, we finally had, as I've said earlier, a lot of time for development. We could spend more time in a completely new platform without having to go to races at the same time. So we could slowly and steadily work on new things without having to be split between different classes and traveling around the world. So yeah, those three reasons, I would say.
Not an easy answer, not an easy question to answer, that one. I mean, every manufacturer is trying to go faster, right? I mean, ultimately, there seems to be a cycle, and I haven't been in this hobby long enough, but it does seem that companies create a platform, have 2 or 3 iterations of it, and then change platform, and then they go 2 or 3 iterations again, in the same way car manufacturers do, right? I mean, BMW bring out 5 Series, have 3 facelifts, and then start a new one again. Ultimately, those 3 iterations, there's a lot of water under the bridge, and they've stretched the limits of that car, that initial chassis. Development's moved forward so much in that amount of time, and you need to progress and move forwards. And I think nobody would be uncomfortable with you saying that it just wasn't quick enough at that time, because it was a model that has been around for 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah, and also especially because the front end that we used, that was still part of the standard kit in the 2020 car. It was almost identical to the front end that we first put out on the first X-Ray 12 car at the end of 2008. So it's been around for a while, and that's also partly why at the Worlds in Milton Keynes I ran not a prototype front end, but I ran a front end with some development parts, so to speak, which already proved a lot better, but it wasn't good enough, and it wasn't good enough for production for the average driver to use. It was a good first step with the carbon arms, but it was something along the way of the development of the new car.
Yeah, that's great stuff. A lot of really thankful people about the weight balance that you've just done. Darren Ford really enjoyed that, and Stefanos that asked the question, very happy with your answer. Thanks very much for that. Lewis Barker asked another really good question, and one that I'm actually really quite interested in, because I've always been very underwhelmed when I've gone to America, when I've gone to the NYGP and I've performed like a turnip. What mistakes do you see when club racers go to big events? Is there any 1, 2, or 3 examples or things that you might? I suppose it's in your experience, I suppose, of course, when you go from a club race to a bigger race, what differences you see in that obviously we don't see because we're only doing it now and then.
I think a common mistake that people do when they take the step from club racing to national racing or to international racing is that maybe how can I put this? Of course, it's overwhelming to go to a big race for the first time, and it can be frightening, and it can be very difficult, very challenging. And I think people go to big races sometimes, and they expect too much. Maybe they need a different approach. Maybe they need to go there with the approach of trying to learn, trying to watch the best drivers, trying to gather as much information as they can, and not put too much pressure on themselves. Just with the approach of going there to learn and see where it takes them. Not saying to yourself, yeah, I will go to a big race for the first time, and if I'm not in the C main, then yeah, I'm gonna give up racing. Like, you need to go there with the approach that it's gonna be challenging, it's gonna be tough, but try the best you can to learn from the best drivers, watch them drive, watch them work on their cars, ask them 100 questions. They will respond mostly. And yeah, I think it's mainly about the approach that you have when you travel to a big race for the first time.
I think the big pickup for me is that expectation that you go there with, and being able to pick it up. There is something about, I've always felt, that as soon as you get on an aeroplane and fly a certain amount of hours in the air, whether it's the water, whether it's the air, but it's a very different, drive on a different side of the road. It's very different to driving 4 hours up north and going to a car pit and a bunch of people that you know. I think there is something mentally that you really have to cross over and almost that ability to be comfortable with in your own skin, if you like, in a new country, in a new surroundings, and that big fish out, the small fish in a big pond kind of syndrome is something that you need to be comfortable with, because you've got to get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, and that's something, something that was really inspiring. Being lucky enough to pit behind you at the Worlds, you were exceedingly up against the wall going into the final round of qualifying, weren't you? And you pulled it out, and I think that kind of resilience, you can't. Oh, Alex just pops across and does okay. There's so much that goes on within people performing at a high level that we fail to appreciate that when we just get on a plane and go and turn up at a big event and expect to do similar to the way we do at home. Doing similar to the way we do at home would be an unbelievable achievement, let alone excel. So I think it's you can't isolate it to one thing. Like, I didn't put the additive on right. It's a whole cross section of ingredients, don't you think?
I mean, it's really, as you say, it's a combination of factors, but definitely experience is the main point here. The more you race abroad, the more you race at big events, the more comfortable you'll feel. And even for me, after racing hundreds of times internationally at big events, I can always learn something from going to a new race, and it's always difficult to adapt, but the more experience you have, the easier it will be for you to adapt to a new environment, to a new track, to new competitors. I mean, if you race at home in the same type of environment all the time, you mostly race the same people all the time as well. But if you go abroad and you have to face different competitors, that can help you evolve as well. So it's really about getting experience. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll be, and the quicker you will know what to do to adapt.
Well said. Well said. Stu Barber, we have a touring car question, but I'm going to leave that for our last one because we're just coming up to the hour and we don't want to take any more of your precious time. Stuart Barber, he says, these are actually both linked with TC. Watching one of your videos earlier, Stuart Barber has a secret man crush on you, Alex, but he would never admit it. Watching one of your videos earlier about TC setups for LMP, do you have some go-to setup changes that you would consider at a meeting, and some setup changes you really would shy away from?
As for touring car
or LMP?
For LMP.
Okay, so as we spoke about earlier, LMP is always about small changes. Typically, it's about fine-tuning. It's about changing the front droop 0.2 millimeters. It's about adding quarter of a turn of preload to the side springs. Those sort of changes, which I consider to be fine-tuning, but that fine-tuning can make a huge difference to the performance. But something I would prefer not to change at a big event that I would have liked to decide before going there is tire compound and tire size. Preferably, I would like to know exactly what to do in terms of tires before I even get to the event, because that will save me, number one, some time, some confusion, and if I already know what tire to use, and I know this tire is the best and this tire size is the best, then I get more track time where I can focus on how to improve the actual chassis setup, instead of trying to scramble and figure out which tire is the best or which tire size or tire prep is the best. If I already know basically my tire program, I get more time to focus on the setup and the driving. So that's something I would avoid to change unless I really have to. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense, and that is definitely something that I've underestimated the importance of. I mean, it's the only contact with the track. But knowing what additive, what tire size, what type of tire, are huge insights to the event that you're going to. You know, the first time I went to the NYGP, I mean, goodness me, I mean, just truing it down to nothing and glue on the side walls. You know, it was a real eye opener. I'm sure that not every event is like that. I think they had some unusual carpet there, but it's a real eye opener. The tire situation.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I mean, tire compound and size is extremely important, as you know, but I think the tire compound is a little less important the higher grip the track has. But on black carpet in the US, you have the factor of gluing the front wheel, gluing the front tire, the sidewall of the front tire, because if you don't glue it exactly right, car's not going to handle right. It's not only about gluing it, it's about gluing it right, gluing it at the correct height, at the correct thickness. You remember how it was. Luckily, in Europe, we don't have that factor normally to deal with. We only have to deal with the prep, the tire compound, and the tire size. In the US, you have an additional factor, which is the gluing of the front sidewall.
Yeah, long may that stay in the US as well. The Tibby Cart, he says he's running a T4 21 car on super low grip. Should I run hard arms or graphite? When would you run hard arms?
So speaking from previous experience, for 90% of the tracks I go to, I would use graphite arms. For the small 10% of tracks where, number one, the grip is low, and number two, the track is bumpy, the surface is not flat, then the hard arms can be a good option, because the hard arms are a little more forgiving than the graphite arms because they're softer. So they will absorb bumps a little bit better. They will, however, take away a bit of steering. So the car will not rotate as hard and it will not turn as hard in the 180 degrees corners. But it can be more forgiving to drive for low grip and mainly for bumpy tracks. So if that's the kind of condition you're racing in, then I will give them a go.
Excellent. Vincent, he says, I personally think that 80% of the performance of a car is defined by the tyres and the body shell package. What would you advise to optimize that package? And how do you know your mechanical versus aero grip is fine?
Yeah, he's absolutely right. The tires and the body shell, I would probably say about 80% if you combine them. When it comes to fine-tuning the aerodynamics, I normally know what options I have as for body shell choice. So I try to limit my body shell choice to one or two bodies at most. And I try to play with the body shell position and the body shell height. I've made several videos about this previously, not only for touring car, but also for LMP, for 112, where I talk about body shell positioning and body shell height. And yeah, as he says, this is extremely important. It's a big part of the handling. So it's going to make a big difference. But how do I know that it's the body shell more than the car that's causing problems for me pace-wise? Normally, I try to compare with my competitors. What are they running? Are they running the same body shell as me? Are they running the same body shell position as me? Are they running the same body shell height, the same wing size? All those details play a part. So if I'm at a track and I'm struggling for pace, I always try to see what the competitors are doing in terms of aerodynamics, because when it comes to the car itself, if they're not on your team, it's going to be very difficult to know what they're doing with the car. What springs do they have on? What diff oil? Those things are more difficult to know, but visibly you can see that the other guys are running a body shell of this kind with this kind of wing. You can visibly see it. You don't have to sneak around in their pits to find out. So yeah, I always try to see what other guys are doing, and if I have time, I also try to test this when I'm at home or to try and improve it. So it's, yeah, basically like that.
Good stuff. And we've got one final question, which I think I know the answer to, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Gene Sears says, why do you only practice VRC and you don't compete at VRC?
Oh, that's not true. I've actually
actually
competed in quite a few events last year in the springtime when I had the time
to commit to it fully. I mean, now I only drive occasionally just to practice, just to get some wheel time. When I have enough time, possibly during the next couple of months, I will try to join some events, because you know yourself, if you really want to race VRC, you need to spend a lot of time on it. You cannot not just put a computer on and expect to be fast right away. So you need to spend more time on it. And yeah, I mean, I've used it mainly for maintaining my my wheel time during the winter, but possibly I'll join some events in the next couple of months. Yes,
I'm sure that will make Gene very happy. Listen, Alex, you've been a fantastic guest, as you always are. Is there anyone that you'd like to thank before we wrap up?
Yeah, of course.
I would like to thank all my sponsors, as always. X-Ray being the most important one, but all the other ones as well. I'd like to thank my family, everyone that makes it possible for me to do what I love and to live my dream. And last but not least, I'd like to thank my wife for being a nurse through this pandemic and staying strong and helping people in need. So a big thank you to my wife.
Thanks
Thanks
too.
to,
And thank you everyone for watching.
Thanks very much, Alex. See you on the other side.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.